Sandra Kessler planted her foot against the base of the seat, grabbed a 12-year-old girl's arm with both hands, and pulled with every ounce of her body weight. The bone snapped like a dry branch in winter. The child's scream tore through first class, and Sandra didn't flinch. She didn't call for help. She looked down at the girl's arm hanging at a grotesque angle and whispered, "I told you to move." What Sandra didn't know was that the man flying this plane, the most senior captain in the airline, was that little girl's father. And he wasn't just going to end her career, he was going to ground the entire airline. If you want to see justice satisfying, subscribe to my channel and stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Maya Hawkins had been counting the days, 47 of them marked off in red pen on the calendar taped to her bedroom wall in their apartment in Queens. 47 days since her father had kissed her forehead at this same airport and told her he would see her in London for her birthday. Now here she was, 12 years old, walking through JFK International with a boarding pass that said Seat 1A and a denim backpack with a fighter jet patch that her dad had given her when she was 9. She had never flown first class before. She had never flown alone before. Her father had called her 3 times the night before to go over everything. You check in with the gate agent. You show your unaccompanied minor form. You sit in your seat and you don't move until the crew in London walks you off. And Maya, be polite to the crew. Always. They keep you safe. I know, Daddy. And if anyone gives you trouble, I stay calm and I show my boarding pass. That's my girl. Maya gripped the straps of her backpack as she walked down the jet bridge. Her sneakers squeaked on the metal floor. Her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her fingertips. She stepped onto the plane and turned left into first class. It smelled like leather and expensive perfume. The seats weren't seats at all. They were pods, each one bigger than her bed at home. A man in a tailored suit was already settled in 2B, reading the Financial Times. A woman draped in silk was adjusting her sleep mask in 3A. Nobody looked at Maya. She found 1A, the window seat in the very first row, and she slid into it. The leather was cool against her arms. She put her backpack under the seat in front of her and pulled out her boarding pass one more time just to make sure. Seat 1A, Maya Hawkins, Flight 214, JFK to London Heathrow, Atlantic Crown Airlines. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Excuse me," the voice came from above her, like a blade. Maya looked up. A flight attendant stood in the aisle, blocking the light. Her name tag read, Sandra Kessler, Chief Purser. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it stretched the skin at her temples. Her uniform was pressed to a razor's edge. Her eyes moved over Maya the way someone looks at a stain on a white tablecloth. "Yes, ma'am," Maya said. Sandra didn't smile. "This is the first class cabin." "Yes, ma'am, I know. Economy boarding is through the second door, past the galley. You need to keep moving. You're holding up the line behind you." Maya's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady, just like her father taught her. "I'm not in economy. I'm in 1A. She held out her boarding pass. "See? Right here." Sandra didn't take it. She stared at the paper, then at Maya, then back at the paper. Then she snatched it from Maya's hand. She held it close to her face and read it. Her eyes narrowed. She flipped it over as if looking for proof that it was counterfeit. "Sterling Hawkins," Sandra muttered. The name meant nothing to her. She had transferred to Atlantic Crown from a budget carrier 6 months ago. She didn't know the pilots. She didn't care about the pilots. She cared about the passengers who tipped well, the celebrities she could brag about serving, and the Diamond Tier members whose names she memorized. A 12-year-old girl in a hoodie and sneakers carrying a denim backpack was not on any of those lists. "This is a mistake," Sandra said, loud enough for the man in 2B to hear. "System glitch. Upgrade errors happen all the time. I'll sort it out." "It's not a mistake," Maya said. "My dad booked it for me. I'm flying to London to meet him." Sandra let out a short laugh through her nose. She looked Maya up and down, the backpack, the jeans, the dark skin. In Sandra Kessler's world, people who looked like Maya sat in 45F near the lavatories. They did not sit in 1A. "Listen, sweetie," Sandra said, and the sweetness in her voice was like sugar poured over broken glass. "I don't know who your daddy is or what kind of credit card situation he worked out to print this, but I am not having a child disrupt the ambiance of my first-class cabin. We have senators on this flight. We have executives. This is not a playground." Maya felt heat rising in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "I have a valid ticket, ma'am. Seat 1A. "I'm going to do you a favor," Sandra continued, as if Maya hadn't spoken. "I'm going to move you to Economy Plus. There's a nice window seat back there. You'll be much more comfortable with your own kind of crowd. Less pressure." Your own kind of crowd. The words hit Maya like a slap. She understood exactly what Sandra meant. She was 12, not stupid. Her father had told her this might happen someday. Not the exact scenario, but the feeling. The feeling of someone looking at you and deciding you don't belong before you even open your mouth. "No," Maya said. "I'm sitting in 1A. That is my seat." The man in 2B, Mr. Whitfield, lowered his newspaper. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone clipped with annoyance. Sandra's entire body language changed in an instant. Her spine straightened. Her voice shifted to a honeyed falsetto. "Just a ticketing error, Mr. Whitfield. We have a young passenger who's a little confused about her seat assignment. I'm handling it. Nothing to worry about." She turned back to Maya, and the honey vanished. Her eyes were two chips of cold gray stone. "Last chance," Sandra hissed, leaning down so close that Maya could smell her perfume, sharp and overpowering. "Move. Now." "I'm not moving," Maya said. "Check the manifest. Call the gate agent. I'm supposed to be here." Sandra straightened up. Her face flushed red from the neck up. She snapped her fingers at a young flight attendant standing near the galley entrance. "Sarah, get over here." Sarah Nguyen hurried over. She was in her mid-20s, new to the airline, and she looked terrified of Sandra. "Yes, Sandra?" "Pull up the economy manifest. Find an empty seat in the last row. We're relocating this passenger." Sarah looked at her tablet, then at Maya, then back at Sandra. "Sandra," she whispered, "the system has her in 1A. Her status is flagged VIP priority. It says, do not move. There's a note from scheduling that she's the daughter of—" "I don't care what the glitchy iPad says," Sandra snapped. "Look at her, Sarah. Does she look like VIP priority to you? She's a security risk. She's disrupting the cabin. If she won't move voluntarily, I'll remove her as a safety hazard under FAR 91.11. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but the look Sandra gave her shut it immediately. Maya felt tears building behind her eyes. She blinked them back. She was a Hawkins. Hawkins didn't cry when they were right. She sat down firmly in seat 1A and pulled the seatbelt across her lap. She buckled it. Click. It was a small sound, but in the silence of first class, it echoed like a gunshot. Sandra stared at the buckled belt. Something shifted behind her eyes. Something ugly. The defiance of this child, this girl who had no business sitting here, who should have been grateful that Sandra was even offering Economy Plus instead of calling security. It broke something loose inside Sandra Kessler. She leaned down into Maya's space, her face inches away. "You think a seatbelt protects you?" Sandra whispered. "You little brat. You're going to the back of this plane if I have to drag you there myself." Maya said nothing. She turned her head and looked out the window. Her hands were trembling in her lap, but she didn't move. What neither of them knew was that 40 feet ahead, behind the locked cockpit door, Maya's father was already on the aircraft. Captain David Hawkins hadn't planned to be on Flight 214. He had just finished a brutal 14-hour haul from Tokyo to JFK and was supposed to rest at the airport hotel before catching a commercial flight to London the next day. But when he checked his schedule and realized that Flight 214, the very flight Maya was booked on, was departing in 2 hours, he called crew scheduling and asked to deadhead in the jump seat. He wanted to be close, just in case. "You're a helicopter parent at 30,000 feet, his ex-wife had teased him on the phone. She's 12, Karen. She's flying across the Atlantic by herself. She's your daughter. She'll be fine. David wasn't so sure. Something in his gut had been bothering him all morning. He couldn't name it. He just felt it. A low hum of unease, like turbulence you can sense before the instruments pick it up. Now he sat in the jump seat of the cockpit, his uniform jacket draped over his knee, chatting with Captain Ray Maddox, the pilot flying today. Ray was an old friend. They'd come up through the Air Force together, flown F-16s in the same squadron, and both transitioned to commercial aviation within a year of each other. "My girl is in 1A, David said, and he couldn't keep the grin off his face. First time up front by herself. She's growing up too fast, Ray. Ray laughed, punching coordinates into the flight computer. They always do. Don't worry, brother. My crew will treat her like royalty. Who's your purser today? Sandra Kessler, transferred in from Skybridge about 6 months ago. She's efficient, runs a tight cabin. David frowned. He had heard the name. There had been whispers in the crew lounge, complaints from junior attendants about Sandra's attitude, a rumor about a racial comment she made to a gate agent in Miami, but nothing formal, nothing that stuck. Keep an eye out, Ray, just in case. Roger that. The boarding door closed. The jet bridge retracted. The cabin crew began their final checks. The engines started their slow, building whine. David settled into the jump seat and put on the spare headset to listen to the tower frequency. In a few minutes, they would push back, and in 7 hours, he would be in London, waiting at the gate to surprise Maya on her birthday. Everything was going to be fine. It wasn't. In the cabin, the seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime. Passengers settled in. The safety demonstration began on the overhead screens. Sandra Kessler walked the first-class aisle, performing her final cabin check. She saw Maya still sitting in 1A, still buckled in, still looking out the window. The sight of this girl, so calm, so settled, so comfortable in what Sandra considered her domain, made her blood run hot. Sandra had worked her way up from serving pretzels and coach on a regional jet to running the first-class cabin of a Boeing 777. She had clawed for every inch of that status, and she guarded it the way a dog guards a bone. Every passenger in this cabin was a reflection of her. The senators, the executives, the diamond tier members, they validated her. They made her someone. And this girl, this child in a hoodie with a backpack, she was an insult to everything Sandra had built. Sandra stopped at row 1. She gripped the top of the seat divider. "I told you to move." Maya didn't look at her. "We're taxiing, ma'am. I can't unbuckle." "We are not moving until you are in your correct section," Sandra lied. The plane was already pushing back from the gate. "You are in violation of federal aviation regulations by disobeying a crew member's instructions. Get up." "No." Maya's voice cracked, but she held. "Excuse me?" Sandra's voice went up an octave. Passengers in rows 2 and 3 turned to look. Mr. Whitfield put down his newspaper entirely. "I said no, ma'am. This is my seat. I'm not moving." Sandra reached down. She didn't reach for the seatbelt buckle. She grabbed Maya's left arm, the one resting on the armrest. Her fingers dug in through the fabric of Maya's hoodie. Her grip was not a guide. It was a clamp. "You listen to me," Sandra hissed, her face twisted with a fury that had nothing to do with security protocols and everything to do with something much darker. "You don't belong here. You don't belong with these people. You belong in the back with the rest of the trash. Now get out of this seat." She pulled. Maya screamed. "Let go! You're hurting me!" "Get out of the seat!" Sandra screamed back. Every shred of professionalism was gone. She braced her right foot against the base of the pod seat, planted it hard, and pulled Maya's arm with the full leverage of her body weight. She was trying to rip the girl out of the seatbelt's grip like pulling a weed from concrete. But the seatbelt held. Maya's body was anchored. Her arm was not. The physics were merciless. Sandra pulled up and out at an angle, twisting the limb against the natural rotation of the shoulder and elbow. Maya's humerus, the long bone of the upper arm, took the full torsional force. It wasn't designed for that. No human bone is. Snap. It was the sound of a dry branch breaking in a winter forest. It was the sound of something that should never break, breaking. It cut through the cabin and silenced everything. The engines, the air vents, the ambient music, everything stopped. Maya's scream changed. It was no longer a protest. It was a primal, animalistic shriek of pure agony that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Her face drained of color in an instant. She slumped sideways in the seat, her left arm dangling at an angle that no arm should ever make. The bone hadn't broken the skin, but the deformity was visible through the sleeve of her hoodie. A bulge where there should have been a straight line. A bend where nature intended none. Sandra let go. She stumbled backward into the aisle. Her hand flew to her mouth. For 1 second, maybe 2, something that might have been horror flickered across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder, self-preservation. "Oh my God!" Sarah Nguyen screamed from the galley. She had seen the whole thing. Mr. Whitfield was on his feet before the scream finished. He was a big man, 6'2", former Marine, and he moved with the authority of someone who had seen combat and wasn't intimidated by a flight attendant in a pressed uniform. "What the hell did you just do?" he roared, pointing at Sandra. "You just broke that child's arm. I watched you do it." "She resisted," Sandra said immediately. The lie came out smooth, practiced, automatic. "She attacked me. She grabbed my wrist. It was self-defense. I was restraining an unruly passenger." "She's 12 years old," Whitfield thundered. "She was sitting in her seat. She didn't touch you." Maya was curled into a ball in seat 1A, sobbing, her good hand cradling her broken arm against her chest. The pain was beyond anything she had ever known. It radiated from her arm, through her shoulder, down her spine, into her stomach. She was going to throw up. She was going to pass out. She couldn't think. She could only feel. And what she felt was a white-hot fire that consumed everything. "Daddy," she's rocking back and forth. "I want my daddy. Please, Daddy." "Everyone sit down," Sandra yelled, a voice cracking. She was trying to regain control through volume, through authority, through the uniform she wore like armor. "This is a security situation. Remain in your seats. I am handling this." She grabbed the interphone handset and punched the code for the cockpit. Her hand was shaking, but her voice steadied as the line connected. She had to get her story to the captain first. Whoever controlled the narrative controlled the outcome. "Captain Maddox," Sandra said, forcing urgency into her voice, "we have a situation in first class. The passenger in 1A became violent during boarding. She attacked me physically. I had to restrain her, and there may be a minor injury. She's hysterical, possibly under the influence of something. I'm recommending we have law enforcement meet the aircraft. She's a danger to the cabin." In the cockpit, Captain Ray Maddox frowned. He glanced at the jump seat. David Hawkins had gone still. His face had drained of all expression, which Ray knew from 20 years of friendship was the most dangerous state David could be in. 1A, David whispered. "Ray, that's Maya. That's my daughter." Ray's eyes widened. He keyed the interphone. "Sandra, clarify. You said passenger in 1A. Describe the passenger." "Young female, approximately 12 years old. She refused to comply with crew instructions and became physically combative. Captain, she needs to be removed." "You said she's injured. How is she injured?" "She's claiming her arm hurts. She's screaming. She's making a scene. I think she might be faking it for attention, or she hurt herself thrashing around. I need police at the gate, Captain." David ripped the headset off his head. He didn't wait for Ray's permission. He didn't wait for the seatbelt sign to be turned off. He didn't wait for anything. He stood up in the cramped cockpit, and Ray saw his face and knew that nothing on earth was going to stop what was about to happen. "David, wait!" "Open the door, Ray." "David, if you go out there while we're moving, there's going to be a federal—" "Open the door." Ray looked at his friend. He saw the father, not the captain. He reached over and unlocked the cockpit door. David pushed through it. The scream hit him first. It came from the right, from first class, and it was a sound that reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until he couldn't breathe. He knew that voice. He had heard it cry as an infant, laugh as a toddler, sing off-key in the back seat of his car. He had never heard it scream like this. He didn't run, he walked. It was a deliberate, controlled, measured walk, and every flight attendant in the galley pressed themselves against the wall as he passed. He was 6'4", 220 pounds, an ex-fighter pilot who still trained 4 days a week, and the look on his face was something none of them had ever seen on a human being before. It was rage, compressed to the density of a black hole, contained behind a wall of discipline that was cracking by the second. He stepped into the first-class cabin. The first thing he saw was Sandra Kessler standing over his daughter. Maya was curled up in seat 1A, sobbing, clutching her arm. Sandra was leaning over her, one finger pointed in the girl's face. "Stop crying," Sandra was saying. "You're disturbing the passengers. If you don't stop this nonsense right now, I'll have you zip-tied for the entire flight. Do you understand me? Stop crying." "Get away from her." David's voice was not loud. It was low, almost quiet, the way thunder sounds when the storm is directly overhead. It filled the cabin without effort. It vibrated in the bones of every person who heard it. Sandra spun around. She saw a large man in a pilot's shirt, no jacket, no tie, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. She didn't recognize him. She had never met David Hawkins. She had never bothered to learn the names of the pilots she flew with. "Sir, return to your seat immediately. This is a crew matter. Passengers are not permitted to—" Then she saw the lanyard around his neck, the airline ID badge, the 4 gold stripes on the epaulettes of the shirt, the words printed under his photograph. Captain David Hawkins, Chief Check Airman, Atlantic Crown Airlines. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. David looked past her. He looked down at Maya. He saw the arm. He saw the angle. He saw the swelling already pushing against the fabric of her sleeve. He saw the tears streaming down her face, the snot running from her nose, the way her entire body was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. He saw his baby girl, broken and terrified, 30,000 feet from anyone who could help her except him. "Daddy," Maya cried, reaching for him with her good hand. "Daddy, she hurt me. She broke my arm, Daddy. It hurts so bad." David dropped to his knees in the aisle. He didn't care about protocol. He didn't care about the uniform he wore or the regulations he had spent his career upholding. He was not Captain Hawkins in this moment. He was Dad. "I'm here, baby. I've got you. I'm right here. Don't move your arm. Keep it still. I've got you." He looked at the injury without touching it. His Air Force training kicked in. The deformity was mid-shaft humerus. The arm was angulated about 30 degrees from normal. The skin was intact, but there was significant swelling, and Maya's fingers on the affected hand were pale. That meant vascular compromise. The blood flow to her lower arm could be impaired. If they didn't get her to a hospital fast, she could lose the arm. David looked up at Mr. Whitfield, who was still standing in the aisle, his face white with anger. "Sir, what happened exactly?" Whitfield didn't hesitate. "That woman," he pointed at Sandra, "confronted the girl about her seat before we even pushed back, called her a stowaway, told her she didn't belong in first class. The other attendant, the young one, confirmed the girl's ticket was valid. VIP status, do not move flag. Kessler overruled her. She told the girl she belonged in the back with the trash. When the girl refused to move, Kessler grabbed her arm, braced her foot against the seat, and pulled until the bone snapped. It was not an accident, Captain. It was deliberate. It was vicious, and I have every second of it on my phone." David stood up slowly. He turned to face Sandra Kessler. Sandra was pressed against the bulkhead, her hands out in front of her as if to ward him off. "Captain Sterling, I didn't know." She didn't have proper identification. She looked like she didn't. She was resisting, and I was following security protocol. I had no idea she was. "She looked like what?" David asked. He didn't step forward. He didn't raise his voice, but the question landed like a hammer on an anvil. "Finish the sentence, Sandra. She looked like what?" Sandra's mouth moved, but nothing came out. "She looked like she didn't belong," David said for her. "Because she's black, because she's young, because she wasn't wearing designer clothes. You looked at my daughter and you decided she was worthless, and then you broke her arm to prove it. No, that's not Sarah. David turned to the junior flight attendant, who was standing in the galley doorway with tears running down her face. Medical kit, splint and ice, now. Then call Captain Maddox and tell him we are returning to the gate immediately. Medical emergency. Request paramedics and Port Authority police to meet the aircraft. Yes, Captain. Sarah ran. David turned back to Sandra. You are relieved of all duties effective immediately. You will sit in the aft jump seat. You will not speak to any passenger. You will not speak to any crew member. You will not touch anything. And if you so much as look at my daughter again, I will have you restrained for the remainder of this taxi. Do you understand me? Sandra's eyes darted around the cabin looking for an ally, a sympathetic face, someone who would take her side. She found none. Every passenger in first class was staring at her with expressions that ranged from disgust to fury. The man in 4A had his phone out, recording. The woman in 3A had pulled her sleep mask off and was shaking her head slowly. You can't do this, Sandra said, and her voice climbed to a desperate pitch. I am the chief purser. I have authority over the cabin. You're a deadheading pilot. You have no jurisdiction here. I'll file a complaint with the union. I'll have your wings. David leaned forward, not threateningly, calmly, the way a surgeon leans over an operating table. Sandra, he said, I am the senior check airman for this airline. I have the authority to ground any aircraft, remove any crew member, and declare any flight unsafe at my sole discretion. I have trained every captain in this fleet, including the one sitting in that cockpit right now. So when I tell you that you are done, I need you to understand that I am not asking. He paused. Then he said, quieter, so that only she could hear, and you should know that I am declaring this aircraft unsafe for operation due to crew-initiated violence against a minor passenger. I'm not just turning this plane around, Sandra. He straightened up to his full height. I'm going to ground every plane this airline owns. Sandra's face went white. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then she turned and walked to the back of the cabin on legs that barely held her. She sat in the aft jump seat and stared at the floor. David knelt back down beside Maya. Sarah had brought the medical kit. He gently immobilized Maya's arm using a splint and wrapped ice around the swelling. Maya whimpered with every touch, biting her lips so hard it bled. I know it hurts, baby. I know. We're going back to the gate. There are doctors coming. You're going to be okay. She said I didn't belong here, Daddy. Maya's voice was small, broken, barely a whisper. She said I belonged with the trash. David closed his eyes. A single muscle in his jaw twitched. When he opened his eyes, they were wet, but his voice was steady. You belong wherever you want to be, Maya. Wherever your ticket says. Wherever your heart says. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. Not her, not anyone. The plane had stopped taxiing. Through the window, Maya could see the terminal getting closer as the tug pushed them back to the gate. The jet bridge was extending. Red and blue lights flashed on the tarmac below. Daddy? Maya whispered. Yeah, baby? Are you going to get in trouble for this? For coming out of the cockpit? David looked at his daughter's broken arm. He looked at the tears on her face. He looked out at the flashing lights. Let me worry about that. The cabin door opened. Paramedics rushed in first, 2 of them carrying cases and a portable stretcher. Behind them came 4 Port Authority police officers, hands on their belts, scanning the cabin with hard, professional eyes. David stepped back to let the paramedics work. He didn't leave Maya's side. He just moved enough to give them access. Spiral fracture, mid-shaft humerus, the lead paramedic said, cutting Maya's hoodie sleeve with trauma shears. He checked the pulse at her wrist and frowned. Radial pulse is weak, possible vascular compromise. We need to transport now. This girl needs an OR, not a splint. Vascular compromise. The words hit David like a physical blow. If the artery was pinched or torn, she could lose the arm. The sergeant approached David. Sir, are you the captain? I'm the pilot in command by seniority, David said. Captain Maddox is the active flight captain. The incident occurred in the cabin. That woman, he pointed toward the aft jump seat where Sandra sat, is the flight attendant who assaulted my daughter. Sandra heard it. She was on her feet instantly, tears streaming, finger pointing. "Officers, thank God! That man stormed out of the cockpit and threatened me. He's a passenger who interfered with my duties. I was trying to remove a disruptive, unticketed minor, and he attacked me. I want him arrested for interference with a flight crew." The sergeant looked at Sandra. He looked at David. He looked at the 12-year-old girl being loaded onto a stretcher with a shattered arm. "Officer," David said, his voice controlled and measured, "my name is Captain David Hawkins. I am the senior check airman for Atlantic Crown Airlines. That woman broke my 12-year-old daughter's arm because she did not believe a black child could hold a first-class ticket. I want her charged with aggravated battery on a minor." "He's lying," Sandra shrieked. "The girl is a stowaway. She was combative. Check the records." "She's not lying," Mr. Whitfield's voice cut through like a blade. He stood up, holding his phone. "Officer, I'm Gerald Whitfield. I'm a retired federal judge from the Eastern District of New York. I witnessed the entire incident from 18 inches away, and I recorded it. This woman verbally abused a seated, compliant child, used racial language, braced herself against the seat, and pulled the child's arm until the bone fractured. It was unprovoked. It was deliberate, and it was one of the most disturbing things I've seen in 40 years on the bench." A retired federal judge. The sergeant's expression shifted. He looked at Sandra. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Sandra gasped. "What? You can't. Do you know who I work for? I am a senior employee of Atlantic Crown Airlines. I have a union. I have rights. I will have every one of your badges." "You have the right to remain silent," the sergeant said, snapping the handcuffs onto her wrists. The metallic click echoed through the cabin. It sounded, to everyone who heard it, remarkably like the snap of a bone. As they led Sandra through the first-class cabin toward the door, she passed David. She stopped, even as the officer pushed her forward, and she spat her words at him like venom. "You're finished, Hawkins. The airline will back me. The union will back me. You pulled a stunt coming out of that cockpit, and you know it. You'll lose your license. You'll lose your pension. You'll never fly again." David looked at her. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. "Sandra," he said, and every passenger in first class heard him. "By the time I'm done, there won't be an airline left to back you." They pulled her off the plane. The cabin door closed behind her. David turned back to his daughter, who was strapped to the stretcher, her face gray with pain and shock. "I'm riding with her," David told the paramedics. It wasn't a request. As they wheeled Maya through the galley, past the rows of stunned passengers, past Sarah Nguyen, who was crying openly, past the cockpit, where Ray Maddox stood in the doorway with a look of pure anguish on his face, David's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. He didn't know it yet, but Mr. Whitfield's video had already been uploaded. A tech influencer 3 rows back had live-streamed the aftermath. The hashtag Atlantic Crown Horror was trending #1 worldwide. By the time the ambulance pulled away from JFK with its sirens screaming, 40 million people had watched his daughter's arm break. But David wasn't thinking about the internet. He wasn't thinking about the airline. He wasn't thinking about Sandra Kessler or lawsuits or licenses. He was holding Maya's hand in the back of an ambulance, watching her blood pressure on the monitor, praying to God that the surgeon at St. Luke's was as good as his reputation. He was thinking about one thing and one thing only. His little girl was hurt, and the people who let it happen, from the flight attendant who broke her arm to the executives who built the culture that bred her, every single one of them was going to pay. The ambulance screamed through Queens with its sirens splitting the morning traffic. David sat on the bench beside the stretcher, his hand wrapped around Maya's good hand, his knuckles white. The paramedic was on the radio calling ahead to St. Luke's, and every word he said drove a nail deeper into David's chest. 12-year-old female, spiral fracture midshaft humerus, radial pulse diminished, possible brachial artery involvement. We need vascular surgery on standby. ETA, 9 minutes. Maya's eyes were half closed. Her skin had gone from brown to ashen gray. She was slipping into shock, her body shutting down non-essential functions to deal with the trauma. Her lips moved, but barely any sound came out. "Daddy, don't leave me." "I'm not going anywhere, baby. I'm right here. You keep your eyes on me." "She said I was trash, Daddy." David squeezed her hand. "She was wrong, Maya. She was wrong about everything." "Am I going to lose my arm?" The question hit him so hard he had to look away for a second. He blinked twice, set his jaw, and looked back at her. "No, you are not going to lose your arm. The doctors at St. Luke's are the best in New York. You're going to be fine." He didn't know if that was true. The paramedic's face told him it might not be. They arrived at St. Luke's at 8:47 a.m. The trauma team was waiting at the ambulance bay. They pulled Maya out on the stretcher, and David jogged beside her, still holding her hand, until a nurse put a firm palm on his chest at the double doors. "Sir, you can't go past this point. We need to take her to imaging and then possibly straight to the OR. That's my daughter." "I understand, sir. The best thing you can do for her right now is let us work. Dr. Patel is our chief of orthopedic trauma. She's in excellent hands." David let go of Maya's hand. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than landing a crippled F-16 on a carrier deck in a crosswind. Harder than signing his divorce papers. Harder than anything the world had ever thrown at him. Maya's fingers reached back toward him as the stretcher rolled through the doors. "Daddy!" "I'll be right here, Maya, right here when you come out." The doors swung shut. David stood there for a long moment, staring at the gray metal. Then he walked to the waiting room, sat down in a plastic chair, put his elbows on his knees, and pressed his fists against his forehead. His phone had been buzzing non-stop. He pulled it out. 43 missed calls. His ex-wife, Karen, the pilots union president, 3 numbers he didn't recognize, and a text from Ray Maddox that said simply, "Brother, it's everywhere. Call me." David opened Twitter. The hashtag Atlantic Crown Horror had 1.2 million posts. The video had 50 million views, and it had only been 90 minutes. He watched 3 seconds of it, heard the snap, heard Maya scream, and closed the app. His hands were shaking. He called Karen. She picked up on the first ring. "David, I'm on the highway. I'm 40 minutes out. How is she? How bad is it?" "Spiral fracture. They're worried about the artery. She's in imaging now, maybe surgery." "Oh, God. Oh, my God. David, what happened? I've been seeing these videos and I can't." A flight attendant broke her arm because she didn't believe Maya had a first-class ticket. Silence. Then Karen's voice, very quiet, very controlled. "She broke our baby's arm because she's black. Yes. I'm going to kill her. She's in police custody. Karen, just get here safe. Don't speed. Maya needs you in one piece." "David, what are you going to do?" He stared at the dried speck of Maya's blood on his white shirt cuff. "Whatever I have to." 3 hours crawled by. David didn't eat. He didn't drink the coffee the nurse brought him. He sat in that plastic chair and he waited. Karen arrived at 10:15, and they held each other for the first time in 2 years, not as former spouses, but as 2 parents terrified of the same thing. At 11:52 a.m., Dr. Patel came through the double doors. She was a small woman with kind eyes and steady hands, and she got straight to the point. "Maya is out of surgery. We inserted a titanium plate and 6 screws to stabilize the fracture. The good news is we restored blood flow. She's keeping the arm." Karen collapsed into the chair, sobbing with relief. "The bad news," Dr. Patel continued gently, "is that the nerve damage is significant. The radial nerve was stretched and partially torn during the fracture. We repaired what we could, but full recovery of fine motor function in her left hand is unlikely." David felt the floor tilt beneath him. "She plays the violin. She's first chair in her school orchestra. Are you telling me—" "I'm telling you that the dexterity required for professional-level string performance may not return. I'm sorry, Captain Hawkins. We did everything we could." David nodded once. He didn't trust his voice. Karen put her face in her hands and wept. David put his arm around her shoulders, but his eyes had changed. Something behind them had shifted from grief to something colder, harder, more focused. The doctors had saved his daughter's arm. Now he was going to destroy the people who broke it. At 1:15 p.m., the waiting room doors swung open again. It wasn't a doctor this time. The man was in his late 40s, tall, lean, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than David's monthly mortgage. He carried a slim leather briefcase, and his silver hair was combed back with the precision of someone who checked mirrors for a living. He walked in flanked by two younger lawyers who kept their eyes down and their pens ready. "Captain Hawkins," the man said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Garrett Cole, General Counsel for Atlantic Crown Airlines, representing the Meridian Group. First, let me express the airline's deepest sympathies for the terrible accident involving your daughter." David didn't shake his hand. Accident. Cole withdrew the hand smoothly, as if he'd planned for that. He sat down in the chair across from David without being invited. An unfortunate escalation, a breakdown in crew protocols. We are devastated. Sandra Kessler has been immediately suspended pending a full internal investigation. We are taking this extremely seriously. "You flew here in 3 hours," David said, "with 2 lawyers and a briefcase. You're not here because you're devastated, Mr. Cole. You're here because you're scared." Cole's smile tightened, but didn't disappear. He clicked open the briefcase and pulled out a check and a thick document bound with a blue cover. He placed them on the empty chair between them. "Captain, we know this is an incredibly difficult time. We want to ensure Maya receives the absolute best medical care available. This is a check for $100,000. Immediate assistance. Medical bills, rehabilitation, pain and suffering. No strings." David looked at the check. Then he looked at the document beneath it. "And that?" "Standard procedure in cases like this, a mutual non-disclosure agreement. It simply states that you and your family will refrain from discussing the incident with the press or on social media. We want to protect Maya's privacy. Naturally, we don't want her further traumatized by a media circus. You want to buy my silence. We want to resolve this quickly and fairly for everyone involved." David leaned back in his chair. He studied Cole the way he studied a weather system on approach, looking for the hidden turbulence, the wind shear that could kill you. "What if I don't sign?" Cole's smile finally died. He set down his pen and clasped his hands. "Captain, I have enormous respect for your career. 22 years, impeccable safety record. Your 2 years from a full pension with benefits. I would hate to see this situation escalate in a way that complicates your future." "Is that a threat?" "It's context. If this goes to litigation, our legal team will be obligated to conduct a thorough review of your personnel file. The incident in 2018, when you confronted a ground crew supervisor at O'Hare. The 6 months of stress leave you took during your divorce. We could paint a picture, Captain. An emotionally unstable pilot who stormed out of a cockpit during taxi and escalated a minor crew dispute into a federal incident. The FAA takes mental fitness very seriously." Karen, who had been listening from 2 chairs away, stood up. "Are you threatening my ex-husband in a hospital while our daughter is in recovery from an assault committed by your employee?" Cole turned to her with practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Hawkins, I completely understand your anger. It's Ms. Williams, and you don't understand anything." David held up a hand to Karen. He reached forward and picked up the check. Cole's eyes flickered with something that looked like relief. Then David tore it in half, then into quarters. He opened his fingers and let the pieces fall like confetti onto Garrett Cole's $5,000 suit. "You looked into my file," David said quietly. "You found the stress leave, but you didn't look deep enough. You didn't ask why I took the leave." Cole brushed the paper fragments off his knee with a flash of irritation. "Enlighten me." "I took leave because I was meeting with investigators at the Federal Aviation Administration regarding the maintenance protocols for Atlantic Crown's 777 fleet." Cole's hand stopped brushing. It just froze mid-motion on his knee. "I know about Project Skylock," David said. The 2 junior lawyers looked at each other. One of them stopped writing. That name is proprietary and confidential, Cole said, but his voice had lost its polish. I don't know what you think, I think I know that the Meridian Group deferred heavy maintenance checks on 20 Boeing 777 aircraft by exploiting a loophole in the International Airworthiness Registry. I think I know that your D-check intervals were extended by 14 months without FAA approval. I think I know that non-destructive testing on wing root fittings was skipped on at least 12 airframes currently in active service. And I think I know that the reason you did all of this is because Preston Meridian wanted to boost the quarterly earnings report to pump the stock price before a secondary offering. Cole stood up. The briefcase snapped shut so hard it sounded like a gunshot. If you release any proprietary information, we will sue you for corporate espionage. You will face federal prosecution. You signed a confidentiality agreement when you were hired. I signed an agreement to protect trade secrets, David said, not to cover up safety violations that could kill 300 people over the Atlantic. That's not espionage, Garrett. That's whistleblowing, and it's federally protected. Cole leaned in close. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You're making a very dangerous enemy, Captain. No, David said. You made a dangerous enemy when your flight attendant broke my daughter's arm. I was just going to sue you. Now I'm going to bury you. Cole straightened his tie, turned on his heel, and walked out with his lawyers trailing behind him. David watched them go. Karen sat down beside him. David, what is Project Skylock? What are you talking about? Something I've been sitting on for 8 months because I thought the system would fix itself. I reported it through proper channels. I filed safety concerns with the airline. I went to the union. I went to the FAA's voluntary disclosure program. Nothing happened. They buried it. They threatened my pension. They sent me to mandatory psych eval and called it stress leave. And now? Now they broke my daughter's arm. Now I'm not asking the system to fix itself. I'm going to tear the system apart. David pulled out his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Frank DeLuca, president of the Airline Pilots Association, the largest pilots union in the world. Frank picked up immediately. David, I've been watching the news. The whole country is watching. How's Maya? She's out of surgery, titanium plate and screws. She'll keep the arm, but she's lost fine motor control in her left hand. She'll never play violin again. Jesus, David, I'm so sorry. Frank, I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm invoking my rights under the Federal Aviation Whistleblower Protection Act. I have documentation of systemic maintenance fraud at Atlantic Crown Airlines, deferred D-checks, falsified inspection logs, structural deficiencies in the wing root fittings of at least 12 active 777 airframes. I'm going to the FAA tomorrow morning, and I want the union standing behind me. Frank was quiet for 5 seconds. David could hear him breathing. David, if what you're saying is true, this is going to be the biggest aviation safety scandal since the 737 MAX. It's true, and it's worse than the MAX because those planes never crashed. They just got lucky. I'll be on the first flight to D.C. tonight. We go in together. The second call was to a number David had kept in his phone for 3 years, but never dialed. A Washington, D.C. number. It rang 4 times before a deep voice answered. This is Darren Knox. Mr. Knox, my name is Captain David Hawkins. You don't know me, but I need a lawyer. The kind who doesn't back down from a billion-dollar private equity firm. Captain Hawkins, I know exactly who you are. I watched the video of your daughter 4 hours ago. I've been waiting for this call. What do you charge? For this case? Nothing. I get paid when they pay. And Captain, they are going to pay. David hung up. He sat there for a moment, his phone in his hand, his eyes on the double doors where his daughter lay in a hospital bed with titanium holding her bones together. Karen was watching him. You know they're going to come after you, she said. The airline, the hedge fund, their lawyers. They'll try to destroy your reputation. They'll call you a disgruntled employee. They'll say you're doing this for money. I know. They'll drag our divorce into it. They'll drag Maya into it. They'll put everything we have under a microscope. I know, Karen. So you're sure You're sure you want to do this?" David looked at her. "Our daughter is lying in that room with screws in her arm because a woman looked at her skin and decided she was trash. And the company that hired that woman is flying planes that could fall out of the sky any day. So yes, I'm sure." Karen nodded slowly. Then she said something that surprised him. "I'm with you. Whatever you need, I'm with you." At 6 a.m. the next morning, David Hawkins walked into the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C. He wore his full dress uniform, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, his captain's hat tucked under his arm. Frank DeLuca walked beside him in a charcoal suit with the Alpa pin on his lapel. Behind them, a paralegal from Darren Knox's firm carried 2 banker's boxes of documents. They were escorted to the office of Director Catherine Vance, head of the FAA's Flight Standards Division. Vance was a former Navy test pilot, no nonsense, gray-haired, with reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose. She had already seen the video. Everyone in America had seen the video. "Captain Hawkins," she said, shaking his hand. "How is your daughter?" "She's stable, thank you. But I'm not here about my daughter, Director. I'm here about something that could affect thousands of daughters." He sat down across from her desk and opened the first box. He pulled out a maintenance log and slid it across the table. "This is the maintenance record for Atlantic Crown ship number 402. Look at the D-check interval." Vance put on her glasses. She read. She looked up. "This aircraft was due for a D-check 14 months ago." "Yes, ma'am. It was deferred using an alternative compliance procedure filed with the Cayman Islands Aviation Registry, where Atlantic Crown holds its international operating certificate. The loophole allows extended intervals if certain conditions are met. Those conditions were not met. The paperwork was falsified." David pulled out a second log, then a third, then a fourth. He laid them side by side. "Ships 402, 487, 519, 553, 599, 612, 678, 701, 755, 811, 858, and 881. 12 aircraft, all with deferred D-checks, all with skipped, non-destructive testing on wing root fittings. Some of these planes have microfractures in the forward spar that were identified on preliminary scans and then deleted from the final reports." Vance's face had gone white. "Deleted?" David pulled out a printed email chain. "This is internal correspondence between Garrett Cole, the general counsel, and the VP of maintenance. I'm reading the relevant line. Captain Hawkins is becoming a problem. His safety concerns are noted but overruled. We cannot afford downtime in Q3. Defer the D-check. Use the alternative compliance method. If Hawkins pushes back, threaten his pension." Vance took the email. Her hand was not entirely steady. "Director, I reported this through the airline's internal safety system 9 months ago. I was sent to mandatory psychiatric evaluation and placed on medical leave. When I returned, my routes were changed and I was moved off the 777 fleet. They tried to bury me. I let them because I thought the system would eventually catch it. What changed? Yesterday, a flight attendant broke my daughter's arm on one of those planes because the culture at Atlantic Crown taught her that rules are for other people. The arrogance starts at the top and rots its way down. If they'll cover up cracked wing roots, they'll cover up anything. My daughter's arm was a symptom. Those planes are the disease." Vance stood up. She walked to her window and looked out at the D.C. skyline. "Captain, how many of these 12 aircraft are currently in service?" "All of them. As of this morning, 7 are in the air. 3 are over the Atlantic right now." Vance turned around. "If one of those planes hits severe turbulence and the wing route fails, 300 people die," David said. "Maybe more, depending on what they're flying over." Vance reached for her phone. She hesitated. "Captain, if I issue an emergency grounding order for the entire 777 fleet, it will strand approximately 50,000 passengers worldwide. Atlantic Crown's stock will collapse. The economic damage could reach billions. If your documentation turns out to be insufficient..." Then I'll take the fall, David said. But Director, I have the logs, the emails, the falsified inspection reports, and 8 months of documentation. I didn't come here to bluff. I came here because 3 planes full of people are over the ocean right now, sitting on cracked wing roots. And every minute we sit in this office is another minute they don't know about it. Vance picked up the red phone on her desk. This is Director Vance, Flight Standards. Connect me to the ATC Command Center. Authorization code Alpha 19er. I need to issue an emergency airworthiness directive and a ground stop for all Atlantic Crown Airlines Boeing 777 aircraft worldwide, effective immediately. No exceptions, no delays. Any aircraft currently airborne is to be diverted to the nearest suitable airport and grounded upon landing. This is not a drill. She hung up the phone and looked at David. You just shut down one of the largest airlines in the United States. David stood up. He put his captain's hat on his head. No, ma'am. They shut themselves down. I just turned on the lights. 12 minutes later, gate agents across 6 countries watched their screens flash red. Flight canceled. FAA emergency order. Pilots and cockpits from Miami to Tokyo received ACARS messages on their flight computers. Immediate grounding directive. Do not take off. Aircraft in flight, divert to nearest suitable airport. Shut down engines upon arrival. In the Meridian Group boardroom on the 52nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, Marcus Meridian was watching Bloomberg when the stock ticker caught his eye. Atlantic Crown, trading symbol ACRO, had been at $45 a share when the markets opened. The line didn't dip. It didn't curve. It fell straight down like a stone dropped off a cliff. 40, 30, 20. Trading halted. What is happening? Marcus shouted at his assistant. Why is trading halted? Get Cole on the phone. Get the board on the phone. Get someone on the phone who can tell me why my stock is in free fall. The television in the corner of the boardroom answered his question. The CNN chyron read, Breaking. FAG grounds entire Atlantic Crown 777 fleet. Whistleblower pilot reveals catastrophic maintenance fraud. And there, filling the screen, was Captain David Hawkins, walking out of the FAA building into the morning sunlight, his uniform crisp, his jaw set, his eyes looking directly into the camera, as if he could see through it, into every boardroom, every corner office, every executive suite, where men in expensive suits had decided that profit mattered more than people. Marcus Meridian stared at the screen. His phone rang. It was Garrett Cole. Marcus, we have a situation. I can see the situation, Garrett. It's on every television in America. What did you do? I sent you to handle a broken arm, $100,000 problem. How did this become a billion-dollar catastrophe? He had documentation, Marcus. He had everything. The Project Skylock emails, the maintenance deferrals, the falsified NDT reports. He had it all, and he took it straight to the FAA. You told me he was neutralized. You told me the psych eval and the pension threat would keep him quiet. It did keep him quiet. For 8 months. Then we broke his daughter's arm. Marcus Meridian sank into his chair. On the screen behind him, the stock price was frozen at $11.42. The SEC had halted trading pending investigation. His net worth had dropped by $600 million in 12 minutes. His phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. It was from David Hawkins. 2 words, check your 6. Marcus stared at the message. He was not a military man. He didn't know the term. His assistant, a former Army officer, looked over his shoulder and went pale. It means someone is behind you, sir. It means you never saw him coming. Marcus Meridian did not sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse on the 63rd floor of a building he owned overlooking Central Park, and he watched himself being destroyed in real time. Every cable news channel ran the same split screen. On the left, the viral video of Maya's arm snapping. On the right, grounded Atlantic Crown 77s sitting dark and silent at gates across the world. The chyron on CNN read, Whistleblower pilot exposes massive safety fraud. Airline fleet grounded. FBI investigation launched. On Fox, the angle was slightly different. American families stranded as FAA shuts down major carrier. On MSNBC, it was the one that made Marcus throw his glass at the wall. Black girl's broken arm uncovers billion-dollar conspiracy. His phone had not stopped ringing. Board members demanding emergency meetings, investors demanding explanations, his publicist demanding instructions, his wife demanding to know if they were going to lose the house in the Hamptons. At 2:17 a.m., Garrett Cole called. "Marcus, we have a bigger problem. Bigger than the FBI raiding our server room 6 hours ago? Bigger than our stock being delisted? What could possibly be bigger, Garrett?" Senator Patricia Hargrove just announced a full Senate committee hearing, Commerce, Science, and Transportation. She's convening it in 72 hours, emergency session. She's subpoenaing you, me, the VP of Maintenance, and Sandra Kessler. Marcus closed his eyes. Hargrove. Of all the senators in Washington, Patricia Hargrove was the one you did not want holding a gavel with your name on it. She was a former prosecutor from South Carolina who had made her career dismantling corporate fraud. She didn't grandstand. She didn't play to cameras. She asked questions the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, precise, deliberate, and always cutting toward the thing you were trying to hide. "Get Satterfield and Pierce on the phone," Marcus said. "I want their entire aviation litigation team in D.C. by tomorrow. I want 12 lawyers at that table." "Marcus, I need to tell you something else." "What?" "Hawkins hired Darren Knox." Marcus went quiet. Darren Knox was not just a civil rights attorney, he was the attorney, the one who had won the landmark airline discrimination case against Continental in 2019, the one who had forced the Department of Justice to reopen the investigation into the Delta ground crew beating in Atlanta, the one who had never lost a case that went to verdict. How much is Knox asking for? He's working on contingency. He's not asking for anything up front. That means he thinks he's going to win big. That means he knows he's going to win big, Marcus. Marcus stared out at the dark expanse of Central Park. Somewhere down there, normal people were sleeping in their beds, not knowing that the planes they had trusted to carry their families across oceans had been held together by falsified paperwork and corporate greed. He didn't feel guilt. Marcus Meridian had never felt guilt about anything in his life. He felt anger. Anger at David Hawkins for not staying quiet. Anger at Sandra Kessler for being stupid enough to break a child's arm on camera. Anger at the universe for letting all of it collapse at the same time. "We need to get ahead of this," Marcus said, "before the hearing. Prepare a statement. We didn't know about the maintenance deferrals. It was a rogue VP of maintenance acting without authorization. We're cooperating fully. We're devastated. We're going to fix it." "That's not going to work," Cole said. "Why not?" "Because the emails have my name on them, Marcus, and 2 of them have yours." 72 hours later, at 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning, the hearing room in the Hart Senate office building was standing room only. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Reporters from CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and the New York Times pressed against each other in the media section. Camera operators from every major network jockeyed for sightlines. Outside, protesters held signs that read, "Justice for Maya" and "Atlantic Crown Kills." At the far end of the room, behind a long mahogany table elevated on a platform, sat Senator Patricia Hargrove and 4 other members of the committee. Hargrove wore a simple navy blazer, and her reading glasses were already on. She had a stack of files in front of her that was nearly 6 inches thick. At the defense table sat the Empire. Marcus Meridian in a suit that cost more than most Americans earned in a month. Garrett Cole beside him, shuffling papers with the manic energy of a man who knew the walls were closing in. Behind them, 12 lawyers from Satterfield and Pierce, the most expensive legal team money could buy. They had briefcases. They had tablets. They had a strategy that had been wargamed for 48 hours straight. And at the far end of their table, separated by 3 empty chairs as if she carried a contagion, sat Sandra Kessler. She'd been subpoenaed and granted limited immunity for her testimony. She wore a soft beige cardigan and no makeup. Her hair was down, softening her face. It was a calculated look, designed to make her seem fragile, harmless, sympathetic. She kept dabbing at her eyes with the tissue, though no tears had actually fallen. At the plaintiff's table, the contrast was absolute. There was no army of suits. David Hawkins sat in his full-dress uniform, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, his captain's hat resting on the table in front of him. His back was straight. His hands were flat on the table. He looked directly ahead at the committee with the steady gaze of a man who had nothing left to lose and nothing left to hide. Beside him sat Maya. She looked small in the high-backed leather chair. Her left arm was encased in a heavy blue fiberglass cast, held against her chest in a black sling. The cast had signatures on it, dozens of them, from classmates and neighbors and nurses at St. Luke's. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at Sandra Kessler. She looked at her father, and when he glanced down at her and nodded once, she nodded back. On David's other side sat Darren Knox. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with deep brown skin and a shaved head. He wore a simple charcoal suit and a red tie. He sat with his hands clasped on the table, perfectly still, his eyes moving slowly across the room, taking in everything, calculating, waiting. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who had already won and was simply waiting for everyone else to realize it. Senator Hargrove banged her gavel once. The room fell silent instantly. This hearing of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation is now in session, Hargrove said. Her voice was clear, unhurried, and carried the weight of someone who had spent 30 years in courtrooms before she ever set foot in the Senate. We are here to investigate the incident aboard Atlantic Crown Flight 214, the subsequent emergency grounding of the Atlantic Crown Boeing 777 fleet, and allegations of systemic safety fraud. Mr. Meridian, you may make your opening statement. Marcus Meridian stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He adjusted the microphone. And he did what Marcus Meridian had always done when cornered. He performed. Senator Hargrove, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address these serious concerns. His voice was smooth, polished, rehearsed to the syllable. First and foremost, our hearts break for little Maya. What happened on Flight 214 was a tragedy, and it should never have occurred. However, we must separate emotion from fact. He paused for effect, glancing at the cameras. The facts are these. Atlantic Crown Airlines maintains rigorous safety and security protocols. When any passenger, regardless of age, refuses to comply with crew instructions during a critical phase of flight, our personnel are trained to ensure the safety of all passengers aboard. We believe our flight attendant, Ms. Kessler, acted under extreme duress in a rapidly escalating situation. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Someone in the back row said, "Shame," loud enough to be heard. Furthermore, Marcus continued, raising his voice slightly, the grounding of our fleet was a drastic and, we believe, disproportionate action initiated by Captain Hawkins, who, while understandably emotional about his daughter's injury, used his position to pursue what amounts to a personal vendetta against this airline. We are confident that the independent safety review will confirm that our aircraft are airworthy and that this disruption, which has stranded 50,000 passengers and cost hundreds of millions of dollars, was unnecessary. He sat down. His lead attorney patted him on the arm. It was a good performance, measured, sympathetic, just enough blame deflected without seeming heartless. Senator Hargrove looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. Then she turned to the other table. Mr. Knox, your opening statement. Darren Knox didn't stand up immediately. He sat still for 5 full seconds. The silence was deafening. Camera shutters clicked. Then he pushed back his chair, rose to his full height, and walked around the table into the open floor between the two sides. He didn't go to the microphone. He didn't need one. His voice filled the room on its own. Duress, Knox said, testing the word like he was biting into something rotten. Mr. Meridian speaks of duress. He speaks of a threat. He speaks of safety protocols. Knox turned and pointed at Maya. Not dramatically, gently, the way you point at something precious. That is Maya Hawkins. She is 12 years old. She plays the violin. She collects stickers of fighter jets because her daddy flies planes. She weighs 92 pounds. She had never flown alone before that morning. Her father booked her a first-class ticket because he wanted her to feel special on her birthday trip. Knox let that settle. Then he turned slowly and looked at Sandra Kessler. And that is Sandra Kessler, 34 years old, 5'8", 140 pounds, former fitness instructor. She bench presses 135 pounds 3 times a week at her gym in Astoria. She braced her foot against a titanium seat base, gripped a 92-pound child's arm with both hands, and pulled with her full body weight until the bone broke. He turned back to the committee. Mr. Meridian calls this duress. I call it what it is. A hate crime committed against a child whose only offense was being black in a seat that a white woman decided she didn't deserve. Objection! The lead Satterfield attorney was on his feet. This is a Senate hearing, not a trial. Counsel is making inflammatory... Sit down, Senator Hargrove said. This is my hearing. I'll decide what's inflammatory. Continue, Mr. Knox. Knox nodded to the senator. Then he turned to Sandra Kessler. Ms. Kessler, you stated in your written incident report that you felt physically threatened by the child. Is that correct? Sandra leaned into her microphone. Her voice was thin, wavering, rehearsed to sound vulnerable. Yes, she was refusing to move. She was belligerent. She was yelling. In a post-9/11 world, we can't take chances. She could have been a distraction for something worse. I didn't know who she was. I had to make a judgment call. A judgment call, Knox repeated. Did you ask to see her boarding pass? I did see her boarding pass. I believed it was fraudulent. Why did you believe it was fraudulent? Because it didn't match the passenger profile for first class. We're trained to spot anomalies. What anomaly did you spot, Ms. Kessler? Sandra hesitated. She was young. She was unaccompanied. She didn't have appropriate luggage for a premium cabin. She had a boarding pass. She had a confirmed reservation. Your own junior flight attendant, Sarah Wynn, told you the system confirmed her as VIP priority with a do not move flag. What else did you need? The system can be wrong. I trusted my instincts. Your instincts, Knox said. He took 3 steps closer to Sandra. Ms. Kessler, in your 6 months at Atlantic Crown, how many passengers did you challenge about their first-class seating? Sandra blinked. I don't recall the exact number. I do. I subpoenaed the records. 14 passengers. Would you like to know what all 14 of them had in common? Sandra didn't answer. Her attorney started to stand. Knox kept going. Every single one of them was black or brown. 14 challenges. 0 white passengers questioned. Not one. Your instincts, Ms. Kessler, have a very specific pattern. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Hargrove tapped her gavel lightly, just enough to restore order. That's a coincidence, Sandra said, but her voice cracked on the second syllable. 14 for 14 is not a coincidence, Ms. Kessler. It's a policy. Your policy. Now, you testified in your written statement that Maya Hawkins broke her own arm, that she, and I'm quoting your exact words, threw herself against the seat restraint, causing the injury. Is that still your testimony, under oath, before this committee? Sandra's eyes darted to the Satterfield lawyers. They looked away. Marcus Meridian was staring at the table. Nobody was coming to rescue her. Yes, Sandra said. She hurt herself. I barely touched her. Knox nodded slowly. He walked back to his table, picked up a tablet, and turned to Senator Hargrove. Senator, the defense is relying on the assumption that there is no visual evidence. Aircraft cabins do not have CCTV. They believe this is Ms. Kessler's word against a 12-year-old child's. But they forgot something. He connected the tablet to the hearing room's display system. The massive screens on both walls flickered to life. They forgot about Mr. Gerald Whitfield in seat 2B, a retired federal judge from the Eastern District of New York, a man who spent 40 years evaluating evidence and who had the presence of mind to press record. Knox looked at Sandra. Play the video. The footage was shaky for the first 2 seconds, then stabilized. Whitfield had clearly braced his phone against the seat back. The angle was perfect, shooting directly across the aisle into row 1. Maya was sitting in 1A. She was looking out the window. Her seatbelt was fastened. Her hands were in her lap. She was not moving. She was not yelling. She was not being belligerent. She was a 12-year-old girl sitting quietly in an airplane seat. Sandra's voice came through the speakers, sharp, venomous, amplified by the Senate's sound system until every word was inescapable. You don't belong here. You don't belong with these people. You belong in the back with the rest of the trash. The gallery gasped. Senator Hargrove removed her glasses and stared at the screen. On the video, Sandra planted her right foot against the base of the pod seat. She grabbed Maya's left arm with both hands. She leaned back and pulled, her body leveraging against the anchored seat like a medieval torture device. Maya screamed, "Let go! You're hurting me! Please stop! Please!" Sandra pulled harder. Her face was contorted with effort and rage. This was not a security restraint. This was not a trained response. This was a woman trying to rip a child out of a seat through sheer brute force. Snap. The sound came through the Senate speakers like a rifle shot. Several people in the gallery cried out. A reporter in the front row covered her mouth. Senator Hargrove closed her eyes for 1 second. Maya's scream on the video changed from fear to agony. It was a sound that no one in that room would ever forget. The camera shook as Whitfield reacted, but it kept recording. It captured Maya's arm hanging limp at the wrong angle. It captured Sandra stepping back, letting go, looking at her hands. And it captured what Sandra said next. "Stop crying. You brought this on yourself." Knox paused the video. The frozen frame showed Maya curled in the seat, her face twisted in pain, and Sandra standing over her with her hands on her hips. The silence in the hearing room was so complete that David could hear the air conditioning humming in the walls. "She broke her own arm," Knox said quietly, looking at Sandra. "That was your testimony, under oath, before this committee and before the American people." Sandra was crying now, real tears, not performative ones. Her carefully constructed facade had shattered like the bone in Maya's arm. "I didn't mean to," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to break. I just wanted her out of the seat. She wouldn't move. She wouldn't listen to me. Nobody ever listens to me." "You said she didn't belong there," Knox pressed. "You said she belonged with the trash." "Why, Ms. Kessler? Because she was 12? Because she wore a hoodie? Or because she was black?" "I'm not racist," Sandra screamed, and the microphone squealed with feedback. "I was doing my job. I was protecting the cabin. You were protecting your ego," Knox said, "and you broke a child's arm doing it." Marcus Meridian stood up abruptly. His lead attorney grabbed his sleeve, but Marcus pulled free. He had made a calculation. The video was devastating. Sandra was a sinking ship. The only way to survive was to throw her overboard and swim for shore. "Senator Hargrove," Marcus said, his voice loud and grave, "we were not fully aware of the extent of this video evidence. What we have seen today is indefensible. Atlantic Crown Airlines terminates Ms. Kessler's employment effective immediately, retroactive to the date of the incident. We fully support criminal prosecution. And we are prepared to enter settlement discussions with Captain Hawkins and his daughter to resolve the personal injury claim fairly and generously." He straightened his tie. He thought it was over. Sacrifice the flight attendant, write a check, save the company. It was the same playbook that had worked 100 times before. "Sit down, Mr. Meridian." It was David. He had not spoken since the hearing began. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a blade through silk. Every camera swung to him. David stood up. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at the committee. "Senator Hargrove, with your permission." Hargrove nodded. "Go ahead, Captain." David walked to the center of the floor. He carried the leather folder he had brought from Washington, the same one he had shown Director Vance at the FAA. He held it at his side like a weapon. "Mr. Meridian wants to settle," David said. "He wants to fire Sandra Kessler, write my family a check, and go back to business as usual. He wants you to believe this was one bad employee, one terrible moment, one broken arm. David opened the folder. Sandra Kessler broke my daughter's arm, and for that, she will go to prison. But Sandra is not why I'm here today. Sandra is a symptom. The disease is sitting at that table in a $10,000 suit. Marcus's lead attorney stood up. Senator, Captain Hawkins is not a member of this committee. He has no standing to— He has standing because I gave it to him, Hargrove said calmly. Sit down, counselor. Captain, continue. David pulled out a document and held it up. I am a senior check airman for Atlantic Crown Airlines. My job is to ensure that pilots are qualified and aircraft are safe to fly. 2 years ago, the Meridian Group acquired Atlantic Crown through a leveraged buyout. Within 6 months, they initiated a cost reduction program internally, codenamed Project Skylock. The goal was to reduce maintenance expenditures by 40% to improve operating margins ahead of a planned secondary stock offering. He pulled out a second document. This is a directive from Garrett Cole, General Counsel, to the Vice President of Maintenance. It instructs him to defer D-check heavy maintenance inspections on 20 Boeing 777 aircraft by exploiting a regulatory loophole in the Cayman Islands Aviation Registry, where Atlantic Crown holds its international operating certificate. He pulled out a third document. This is the original non-destructive testing report for aircraft ship number 599. It shows microfractures in the forward wing root fitting. This is the final report that was submitted to the registry. The microfractures have been deleted. Someone edited the report. He pulled out a fourth document. This is an email from Garrett Cole to Marcus Meridian dated 11 months ago. I will read the relevant section. Hawkins filed another safety complaint about the 777 fleet. Recommend we initiate a fitness for duty evaluation. If he fails, we can ground him instead of the planes. His pension is his weakness. Use it. Garrett Cole knocked his water glass off the table. It shattered on the marble floor, and nobody moved to clean it up. David kept going. I was sent to a mandatory psychiatric evaluation. I was placed on medical leave. When I returned, I was removed from the 777 fleet and reassigned to domestic narrow-body routes. My safety reports were buried. My union grievance was delayed. My pension was threatened. He looked at Marcus Meridian for the first time. Marcus was no longer performing. He was no longer smooth. He was slumped in his chair, his face gray, his platinum watch forgotten on his wrist. You wanted to know why I grounded the fleet, Mr. Meridian, David said. I didn't do it for revenge. I didn't do it for money. I did it because my daughter's broken arm showed me something I should have understood 8 months ago. You can't fix a rotten culture by filing reports. You can't fix it by going through channels. You have to tear it out by the roots. David turned back to the committee. There are 12 Boeing 777 aircraft in the Atlantic Crown fleet with deferred D-checks and falsified inspection records. Some of them were flying transatlantic routes with 300 passengers aboard. If any one of those planes had encountered severe turbulence or a hard landing, the wing route could have failed. We would not be sitting here today discussing a broken arm. We would be discussing a crash site. He threw the folder onto the defense table. It slid across the polished mahogany and stopped against Marcus Meridian's clasped hands. My daughter will never play the violin again, David said. His voice cracked on the word violin, the only crack in his composure since the hearing began. She was first chair in her school orchestra. She practiced 2 hours every day. She had an audition for the Manhattan Youth Symphony next month. That's gone. Sandra Kessler took that from her. He paused. He breathed. But because Maya was on that plane, because Sandra broke her arm, because I came out of that cockpit and saw what your airline really is, 12 planes with cracked wing roots are on the ground instead of in the air. 50,000 people were inconvenienced, but 5,000 people who would have been on those 12 aircraft in the next 30 days are alive. They went home to their families. They hugged their kids. They don't even know how close they came. David looked directly into the camera. You didn't just break my daughter's arm, Mr. Meridian. You broke your own airline. You broke the trust of every passenger who ever bought a ticket. And you almost broke the sky. He walked back to his chair. He sat down. He put his hand on Maya's shoulder. She leaned into him, her cast pressing against his uniform jacket, and she whispered, "You got them, Daddy." The hearing room exploded. Reporters were on their feet shouting questions. The Satterfield lawyers were grabbing their briefcases. Garrett Cole was frozen in his chair, staring at the shattered water glass on the floor as if it were an oracle. Marcus Meridian had his head in his hands. Senator Hargrove banged her gavel 5 times before the room settled. Her voice, when she spoke, was ice. "Mr. Meridian, based on the evidence presented today, this committee is referring your case to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. Mr. Cole, you are advised to retain personal counsel separate from your corporate representation. Ms. Kessler, your immunity agreement covers your testimony today. It does not cover the perjury you committed when you stated under oath that this child broke her own arm. The committee will be forwarding that matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office as well." She looked at David. "Captain Hawkins, on behalf of this committee and on behalf of the flying public, thank you. What you did took more courage than most people will ever be asked to summon in a lifetime." She banged the gavel one final time. "This hearing is adjourned." David didn't move. He sat in his chair with his arm around his daughter while the room erupted around them. Darren Knox leaned over and said something in his ear that no microphone picked up. David nodded. Maya looked up at the chaos, the shouting men, the flashing cameras, the executives trying to flee through side doors. Then she looked at her father, steady and still in the center of the storm. And she knew that the man who had taught her to never give up her seat had just made sure no one would ever have to. The hearing room emptied, but the war did not end. It accelerated. Within 48 hours of Senator Hargrove's gavel striking for the last time, the machinery of American justice locked onto the Meridian Group like a heat-seeking missile, and everything Marcus Meridian had spent 20 years building began to disintegrate. The FBI moved first. At 5:47 a.m. on a Friday morning, 6 black SUVs pulled up to the Meridian Group headquarters on Park Avenue. 32 agents in Navy windbreakers fanned through the lobby, past the security desk, up the elevators, and into every floor simultaneously. They carried federal search warrants signed by a judge in the Southern District of New York. They seized hard drives. They seized laptops. They seized 4 paper shredders, 2 of which were still warm. Someone had been feeding documents into them all night. Marcus Meridian was not in the building. He was at his attorney's office on Lexington Avenue, where the 12-lawyer team from Satterfield and Pierce had been working around the clock to build a defense. But the defense was crumbling faster than they could build it, because the documents David Hawkins had turned over to the FAA were only the beginning. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody at the Meridian Group knew, was that David was not the only whistleblower. At 10:15 a.m. that same Friday, Darren Knox held a press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse in Manhattan. David stood beside him in his uniform. Karen stood on his other side. Maya was not there. She was at home, recovering, watching cartoons with her grandmother, which was exactly where a 13-year-old with a broken arm should be. "This morning," Knox said into a cluster of microphones, "we filed a civil lawsuit in the Southern District of New York on behalf of Maya Hawkins against Atlantic Crown Airlines, the Meridian Group, Sandra Kessler, Garrett Cole, and Marcus Meridian personally. We are seeking compensatory and punitive damages for assault, battery, racial discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent hiring, negligent supervision, and civil conspiracy," a reporter shouted from the crowd. "Mr. Knox, what amount are you seeking?" Knox didn't blink. "We are seeking $200 million. The number hit like a thunderclap. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. "Additionally," Knox continued, "I want to announce that since the Senate hearing 3 days ago, 17 current and former employees of Atlantic Crown Airlines have contacted our office. Flight attendants, mechanics, gate agents, dispatchers. They are coming forward with their own stories of racial discrimination, safety violations, retaliation, and cover-ups. This is not about one flight attendant and one broken arm. This is about a corporate culture that treated human beings as expendable and safety as optional. We intend to prove it. 17 witnesses. Marcus Meridian watched the press conference from his attorney's office on a muted television. His lead attorney, Richard Satterfield himself, sat beside him with a legal pad covered in notes and a face that held no optimism. 17, Marcus said. Where did 17 come from? They came from your airline, Marcus. People who were afraid to talk before are not afraid anymore. The Senate hearing changed the calculus. Hawkins made it safe to come forward. Can we discredit them? Background checks, disciplinary records, financial problems. Satterfield put down his pen. Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I've been practicing law for 31 years. I've defended pharmaceutical companies that killed people. I've defended oil companies that poisoned rivers. I've defended banks that stole billions. And I am telling you right now that this is the worst position I have ever seen a client in. The video of that child's arm is the most damaging piece of evidence I have encountered in my entire career. Every juror in America has seen it. Every judge has seen it. You cannot win this case. You can only manage how badly you lose. Marcus stared at him. So what are you recommending? Settle. Fast. Before the criminal indictments come down. Because once the DOJ moves, and they will move, your ability to negotiate disappears. How much? Knox asked for $200 million. He'll take less. But Marcus, money is not your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is prison. Marcus Meridian had never been afraid of anything in his life. He had built a $3 billion private equity empire from nothing. He had survived hostile takeovers, market crashes, and congressional investigations. But the word prison landed on him like a physical weight. He could feel it pressing down on his chest. I'm not going to prison, Marcus said. Find another way. There is no other way. The emails exist, the maintenance records exist, the falsified inspection reports exist. Your name is on 2 of those emails. Garrett Cole's name is on 6 of them. The FBI has the originals. You cannot make this disappear. Then we blame Cole. He exceeded his authority. He acted without my knowledge. I was a passive investor. I trusted my management team. Satterfield shook his head. The email from Cole to you, dated January 14th, says, and I quote, "Per your instruction, we are deferring the D-checks on the 777 fleet." Per your instruction, Marcus. Those 3 words will be read to a jury, and when they are, your defense collapses. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. 52 floors below, the streets of Manhattan churned with people who didn't know his name, didn't care about his stock price, and would never lose a minute of sleep over his downfall. 2 weeks ago, he had been worth $1.4 billion. Today, his assets were frozen, his stock was worthless, and the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world was building a case to put him in a concrete cell. Get Cole on the phone, Marcus said. That's not advisable. Cole is likely cooperating with the FBI. Anything you say to him, get him on the phone. Satterfield dialed. Cole answered on the 7th ring. His voice sounded like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Garrett, Marcus said, we need to talk about your testimony. My attorney has advised me not to speak with you, Marcus. Your attorney? Since when do you have a separate attorney? Since the Senate hearing, since Senator Hargrove referred us both for criminal prosecution, since the FBI knocked on my door at 6 o'clock yesterday morning and took my laptop, my phone, and my passport. They took your passport? They consider me a flight risk, Marcus, because of the Cayman Islands connection. They think I might run. Marcus felt something he had never felt before. Panic. Not the sharp, focused panic of a market crash, which he knew how to navigate. This was a deeper, more primal fear. The fear of a man who realizes that the machine he built to protect himself is now the machine that will destroy him. Garrett, if you cooperate with them, if you testify against me, my attorney has advised me not to discuss this with you. Goodbye, Marcus. The line went dead. Marcus turned to Satterfield. He's going to flip. Yes. How long do I have? Before the indictment? Based on the pace the Southern District is moving, I'd estimate 2 to 3 weeks, maybe less. They have the documents, they have the witnesses, and now they're going to have Cole. Marcus sat down heavily. His phone buzzed. It was his wife. Marcus, there are reporters outside the house. The children can't go to school. The neighbors are complaining. What is happening? I'll handle it. You said that last week. You said that when the stock dropped. You said that before the hearing. You keep saying you'll handle it, and everything keeps getting worse. Marcus, are we going to lose everything? He didn't answer because he didn't know how to say yes. While Marcus Meridian's world burned from the top down, Sandra Kessler's world was burning from the bottom up. She sat in a holding cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, where she had been since her arraignment 3 days after the flight. The federal prosecutor had opposed bail, arguing that Sandra's conduct demonstrated a pattern of violence and that she had shown a willingness to lie under oath, as evidenced by her perjured testimony at the Senate hearing. The judge agreed. Sandra's court-appointed attorney, a weary public defender named Mitchell Crane, visited her on a Tuesday afternoon. He brought a legal pad, a pen, and news that Sandra did not want to hear. The U.S. Attorney's Office has added charges, Crane told her through the plexiglass partition. In addition to aggravated battery and interference with the flight crew, they're now charging you with perjury for your testimony before the Senate committee. You told them under oath that Maya broke her own arm. The video proves that was a lie. That's a separate federal offense, Sandra, up to 5 years on its own. Sandra's face contorted. I didn't lie. She was resisting. The video doesn't show what happened before he started recording. She grabbed my arm first. Sandra, stop. Crane's voice was tired but firm. I've watched the video 23 times. Every lawyer in America has watched it. The girl is sitting still. She is buckled in. She is not touching you. You braced your foot against the seat and pulled her arm until it broke. There is no interpretation of that footage that supports your version of events. None. Then the video is misleading. The angle is wrong. It doesn't show. Sandra, Crane leaned forward. I am your attorney. I am the only person in this building who is on your side. And I am telling you that if you go to trial with this defense, you will be convicted on every count, and the judge will give you the maximum sentence. Your only option is to plead guilty, cooperate, and hope for leniency. Sandra slammed her palm on the counter. The guard by the door shifted his weight. I'm not pleading guilty. I didn't do anything wrong. She didn't belong in that seat. She was a security threat. Why won't anyone believe me? Crane looked at her for a long time. Because you're on video breaking a child's arm while telling her she belongs with the trash, Sandra. That's why no one believes you. Sandra started to cry. Not the performative tears she had used at the hearing. Real tears. The kind that come from a place of genuine self-pity, which is different from genuine remorse. She wasn't crying because she had hurt Maya. She was crying because she had been caught. The union won't return my calls, Sandra said between sobs. The airline won't pay for my lawyer. My sister won't answer my phone. My own mother told me she's ashamed of me. Everyone has abandoned me. That's what happens when 100 million people watch you break a child's arm, Sandra. There's nobody left to defend you. What about Meridian? What about Cole? They should be helping me. I was their employee. I was following the culture they created. If they hadn't pushed us so hard, if the turnaround times weren't so insane, if I hadn't been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight. Crane held up his hand. Say that again? What? What you just said about the culture, about the turnaround times, about the double shifts. Say it again, slowly. Sandra wiped her eyes. They've been cutting staff for 2 years, since Meridian took over. We used to have 8 attendants on a 777. Now we have 6. We used to have 90-minute turnaround between flights. Now it's 50. They eliminated the pre-flight crew briefing to save 10 minutes. They told us to handle seat disputes ourselves instead of calling the gate agent because gate calls cause delays, and delays cost money. Everything was about speed. Everything was about the numbers. Crane was writing furiously. Did anyone ever tell you explicitly to remove passengers who didn't look like they belonged in premium cabins? Sandra hesitated. Then she said something that would change the trajectory of the entire case. There was a training session 6 months ago when I first transferred in. The head of cabin operations, a man named Parker Reed, showed us a presentation. It was called Protecting the Premium Experience. One of the slides had a list of what he called profile indicators for potential seat fraud. Young passengers traveling alone, passengers with economy-style luggage in premium cabins, passengers who appeared confused or out of place. And there was a line, I remember it exactly, that said, "Trust your instincts about who belongs in premium seating." Crane stopped writing. "Do you have a copy of this presentation?" "No, but it was on the company intranet. Every purser in the airline had access to it." "Sandra, if this presentation exists, it means the airline trained you to profile passengers. It means your behavior on that flight wasn't just your decision, it was company policy." For the first time in weeks, something besides self-pity appeared in Sandra's eyes. "I want to make a deal," she said. "I want to talk to the prosecutors. I'll tell them everything. About the training, about Parker Reed, about the pressure, about all of it." Crane nodded. "I'll make the call." The news of Sandra's cooperation hit the Meridian Group like a second earthquake. She wasn't just testifying about the arm, she was testifying about a systematic program of racial profiling embedded in the airline's training materials, authorized by senior management, and designed to protect the premium brand experience by keeping people who didn't fit a certain profile out of first class. The presentation she described, Protecting the Premium Experience, was recovered from Atlantic Crown servers by FBI Digital Forensics. It was exactly as Sandra had described it. Slide 7 contained the phrase, "Trust your instincts about passenger fit," next to a stock photo of a premium cabin filled entirely with white business travelers. Parker Reed, the head of cabin operations who had created the presentation, resigned within 24 hours of being served with a subpoena. He hired his own lawyer. He began cooperating with the FBI. He confirmed that the profiling program had been implemented at the direct request of Garrett Cole, who had told him in an email that the FBI now possessed, "Our premium passengers expect a certain standard. Make sure the cabin reflects that." The dominoes were falling, and each one that fell pointed back to the same place, the top floor of the Meridian Group. At 7:30 a.m. on a Monday morning, exactly 26 days after Maya Hawkins' arm was broken on Flight 214, a federal grand jury in the Southern District of New York returned a sealed indictment. It was unsealed at 9 a.m. The charges read like a catalog of corporate criminality. Marcus Meridian, conspiracy to defraud the United States, wire fraud, reckless endangerment of aviation safety, obstruction of justice. Garrett Cole, conspiracy, obstruction, witness tampering, making false statements to federal investigators. The VP of Maintenance, a man named Dennis Archer, who had executed the falsified inspection reports, conspiracy, fraud, and violations of federal aviation safety statutes. U.S. Marshals arrested Marcus Meridian at his home in Greenwich, Connecticut at 6:15 a.m. before the indictment was unsealed. His wife watched from the doorway in her bathrobe as they put handcuffs on her husband and walked him to a waiting SUV. His 14-year-old son stood on the stairs behind her, holding his phone, recording. "Dad?" the boy called out. "Dad, what's happening?" Marcus didn't turn around. He couldn't. Not because the marshals wouldn't let him, but because he couldn't bear to see his son's face. For the first time in his life, Marcus Meridian understood what it felt like to have your child watch you be destroyed. And for one brief, searing moment, he thought of David Hawkins kneeling beside a stretcher, holding his daughter's hand. And he understood the kind of rage that could make a man burn an empire to the ground. The moment passed. Marcus Meridian was not a man built for empathy. He was processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and brought before a magistrate judge. Bail was set at $50 million. He posted it within the hour using the Greenwich estate as collateral. He walked out of the courthouse into a wall of cameras and said nothing. Garrett Cole was arrested the same morning at his apartment in Tribeca. His bail was set at $10 million. He didn't post it. He sat in his cell for 3 days before his wife could arrange the bond. By the time he got out, his law license had been suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. His firm had fired him. His name had become a punchline on late-night television. David Hawkins watched the arrests on television from the living room of his apartment in Forest Hills. Maya was next to him on the couch, her cast resting on a pillow, eating cereal with her good hand. Karen was in the kitchen making coffee. "They arrested him," David said quietly, watching Marcus Meridian being led to the SUV. Maya looked at the screen. She watched the man in the handcuffs, the man whose company had employed the woman who broke her arm, the man whose greed had put cracked planes in the sky. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt something quieter and more complicated. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "Is it over?" David put his arm around her. He kissed the top of her head. "The hard part is over. The rest is just the system doing what it's supposed to do." "She said I didn't belong there, in the seat." "I know." "Do you think she really believed that, or was she just mean?" David thought about it. He owed his daughter honesty, not comfort. "I think she believed it, Maya. I think she looked at you and saw something that didn't match her picture of who deserves nice things. And instead of questioning her picture, she tried to force you to fit it. That's what prejudice does. It doesn't just hurt the person it's aimed at. It makes the person holding it stupid and cruel." Maya thought about that for a while. Then she said, "I'm going to fly someday, Daddy. Like you." David looked down at her cast, at the scar that would run from her elbow to her shoulder for the rest of her life, at the fingers that would never again hold a violin bow with the precision that had made her first chair. "Yeah, baby," he said, "you're going to fly." The phone rang. It was Darren Knox. "David, we need to talk about the settlement offer." "What settlement offer?" "Satterfield just called. Meridian wants to settle the civil case before the criminal trial. He's offering $65 million. David was quiet for a moment. $65 million. It's the largest individual settlement in aviation discrimination history. I recommend we take it. If we go to trial, the criminal proceedings could delay the civil case for years. Maya deserves the money now, not when she's 25. Does the settlement require an NDA? No, I made that a non-negotiable condition. No gag orders, no confidentiality. You tell your story whenever you want, to whoever you want, for the rest of your life. David looked at Maya. She was watching cartoons again, her broken arm propped on the pillow, a milk mustache on her upper lip. She had no idea that a phone call was about to change her financial future forever. She was 12 years old, and all she wanted was to finish her cereal and watch the next episode. "Take it," David said. "Done. I'll have the papers drawn up by end of day." "David, one more thing." "What?" "The criminal trial for Marcus Meridian is set for 3 months from now. The prosecutor wants Maya to testify." David's hand tightened on the phone. "No, absolutely not. She's 12. She's been through enough. I told them that. They said her testimony isn't essential. They have the video, the documents, and Cole's cooperation, but they want you to testify." "About the maintenance fraud?" "About everything. The fraud, the retaliation, the cover-up, and what happened on that plane. You're their star witness, David. Without you, they have a strong case. With you, they have an airtight one." David looked out the window. A plane was climbing in the distance, leaving a white contrail against the blue sky. He had spent his whole life in the sky. He had trusted the sky, and he had trusted the people who were supposed to keep it safe. "Tell the prosecutor I'll be there," David said. "Every day, for as long as it takes." The trial of Marcus Meridian began on a cold Monday in November in the federal courthouse at 500 Pearl Street in Lower Manhattan. David Hawkins was there at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the doors opened, wearing his dress uniform with 4 gold stripes on the shoulders. He had worn this uniform to fly 747s across oceans, to train the best pilots in the country, and to walk into the FAA and shut down an airline. Now he wore it to finish what he started, The prosecution called 23 witnesses over 11 days. Mechanics who had flagged cracks and been told to close the work orders. Inspectors who had been pressured to sign off on reports they knew were falsified. Dispatchers who had raised concerns about aircraft routing and been transferred to overnight shifts as punishment. One by one, they took the stand, swore an oath, and told the truth that the Meridian Group had spent 2 years and millions of dollars trying to bury. Garrett Cole was the prosecution's star cooperating witness. He had taken a plea deal, 8 years, reduced from a potential 20, in exchange for full and complete testimony against Marcus Meridian. Cole sat in the witness box for 3 days. He was thin. His suit didn't fit anymore. His eyes had the hollow look of a man who had already accepted that his life, as he had known it, was over. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor said, "did Marcus Meridian personally direct you to defer the D-check maintenance inspections on the Boeing 777 fleet?" "Yes." "Was he aware that deferring those inspections could result in structural failures?" "I showed him the risk assessment. He read it. He said, and I'm quoting from memory, 'The risk is theoretical. The stock offering is real. Defer the checks. If anyone asks, we used the alternative compliance method.'" "And did you convey those instructions to the maintenance department?" "Yes, by email. The same emails that Captain Hawkins obtained and turned over to the FAA." Marcus Meridian sat at the defense table, watching the man he had trusted for 15 years dismantle him sentence by sentence. His attorneys objected frequently. They challenged Cole's credibility. They pointed out his plea deal. They suggested he was lying to save himself. But Cole had brought receipts. Every statement he made was backed by documents, emails, calendar entries, and phone records that the FBI had recovered from the seized servers. David took the stand on day 9. The courtroom was packed. He walked to the witness box, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth, with the same calm, steady voice he used to brief his first officers before a transatlantic crossing. The prosecutor walked him through everything: his discovery of the maintenance discrepancies, his internal safety reports, the retaliation, the forced psychiatric evaluation, the threats to his pension. And then, Flight 214. Maya. The arm. The snap. The moment he walked out of the cockpit and saw his daughter, broken, in seat 1A. "Captain Hawkins, why did you request the grounding of the entire 777 fleet?" "Because I had evidence that at least 12 aircraft had structural deficiencies that could lead to catastrophic failure. Those planes were carrying passengers every day. Families, children, people who trusted that the airplane they boarded had been properly maintained. That trust was being violated, and the airline had shown that it would not correct the problem voluntarily." "And the incident with your daughter, did that factor into your decision?" David paused. He looked at Maya, who was sitting in the gallery with Karen. Maya gave him a small nod. "My daughter's broken arm showed me something I should have understood months earlier," David said. "The culture at Atlantic Crown was rotten from the top down. When a flight attendant believes she can break a child's arm and face no consequences, that tells you everything about the organization she works for. The same arrogance that let Sandra Kessler assault my daughter is the same arrogance that let Marcus Meridian fly cracked airplanes over the Atlantic. It's the same disease. The belief that rules are for other people. The belief that power means you can do whatever you want, to whoever you want, and nobody will ever hold you accountable." He looked directly at Marcus Meridian. "I held him accountable." The defense cross-examined David for an entire day. They questioned his motives. They suggested he was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. They pointed out that he had violated cockpit security protocols by exiting the flight deck during taxi. They implied that his emotional state over his daughter's injury had clouded his judgment about the maintenance issues. David didn't flinch. Not once. He answered every question with the precision of a man who had spent his career making life-or-death decisions at 500 miles per hour. When the defense attorney suggested that the maintenance deferrals were within acceptable industry practice, David pulled out a federal aviation regulation and read it aloud. When the attorney implied that David had stolen confidential documents, David explained the federal whistleblower protection statute from memory. When the attorney asked if David had a personal vendetta against Marcus Meridian, David said, "I didn't know Marcus Meridian's name until his lawyer showed up at my daughter's hospital with a check and a gag order. He made it personal. I just finished it." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They came back on a Thursday afternoon. The foreman, a retired schoolteacher from the Bronx, stood up and read the verdicts. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, guilty. Wire fraud, guilty. Reckless endangerment of aviation safety, guilty. Obstruction of justice, guilty. Marcus Meridian didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the table, staring straight ahead at nothing. His lead attorney put a hand on his shoulder. Marcus shrugged it off. For the first time in his life, there was no deal to make, no lawyer to call, no check to write, no employee to sacrifice. The system he had spent his career manipulating had finally turned its full weight upon him, and it was crushing him flat. Sentencing came 6 weeks later, 2 days before Christmas. The courtroom was full again. David was there, Karen was there, Maya was not. David had decided that his daughter had spent enough time in courtrooms. The judge, a 71-year-old man named Robert Chen, who had presided over federal cases for 30 years, looked down at Marcus Meridian from the bench. "Mr. Meridian, I have read the pre-sentencing report. I have reviewed the evidence. I have listened to the victim impact statements, and I have thought long and hard about what justice requires in this case." Marcus stood, flanked by his attorneys. He was thinner than he had been at the start of the trial. His suit still cost more than most people's cars, but it hung on him now like a costume that no longer fit. "You are a man of extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary resources," Judge Chen said. "You used both to build a company that millions of people trusted with their lives. And then you betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. You flew airplanes that you knew were unsafe because fixing them would have cost you money. You buried the people who tried to warn you. You threatened their livelihoods. You weaponized psychiatric evaluations and pension reviews to silence a man whose only crime was caring more about human life than your stock price." Judge Chen removed his glasses. "Mr. Meridian, the court has considered your request for leniency. It is denied. You are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Your assets, to the extent they have not already been frozen, are subject to forfeiture proceedings in connection with the civil settlements and class action judgments. You will surrender to the Bureau of Prisons within 30 days. Marcus Meridian said nothing. He didn't react. He simply stood there, absorbing the weight of 15 years, the way a building absorbs the force of a demolition charge, still standing for a moment after the blast, but already falling. Garrett Cole received 8 years. Dennis Archer, the VP of Maintenance, received 6. The Meridian Group was dissolved. Its assets were liquidated to pay the class action lawsuits filed by passengers, crew members, and shareholders. Atlantic Crown Airlines ceased to exist. The brand that had once represented luxury and prestige became a case study in business schools about what happens when greed replaces safety. Sandra Kessler's criminal trial was shorter, quieter, and in some ways, more devastating. She had cooperated with the prosecution against Meridian, and her testimony about the Protecting the Premium Experience training program had been valuable. The prosecutor recommended a reduced sentence, but the judge, a woman named Helen Torres, who had watched the video of the arm snap 3 times during the pretrial phase, was not inclined toward mercy. Sandra stood in the dock in a navy blue suit her public defender had bought for her at a discount store. Her roots were showing. Her nails were unpolished. The woman who had once guarded the gates of first class with the ferocity of a dragon now looked like what she was, a middle-aged woman who had made a choice that destroyed her life. "Ms. Kessler," Judge Torres said, "you have expressed remorse for your actions. You have cooperated with the government. You have provided testimony that assisted in the prosecution of the corporate defendants. The court acknowledges these factors." Sandra let out a breath she had been holding for weeks. "However," Judge Torres continued, and that single word collapsed Sandra's hope like a house of cards, The court cannot overlook what you did. You did not merely make a mistake. You looked at a 12-year-old child, a child who was sitting quietly in her assigned seat with a valid ticket, and you decided, based on her race, that she did not belong. You verbally degraded her. You called her trash. And when she refused to accept your judgment, you broke her arm. You broke a child's arm, Ms. Kessler. And then you lied about it. You lied to the police. You lied to the Senate. You testified under oath that the child broke her own arm. A monstrous lie contradicted by video evidence that the entire world has seen. Sandra was crying. The tears ran down her face and dropped onto the cheap suit. You are sentenced to 5 years in federal custody for aggravated battery and interference with a flight crew, and an additional 2 years for perjury before a congressional committee, to be served consecutively. 7 years total. You will also be permanently barred from employment in the aviation industry. Sandra's knees buckled. Her attorney caught her arm. The marshals led her out through the side door. She didn't look back. There was no one in the gallery to look back at. No family, no friends, no colleagues. She had been abandoned by everyone she had ever known, and she had earned every inch of that abandonment. David watched her go from the back of the courtroom. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel triumph. He felt tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones after a fight that lasted longer than it should have. He walked out of the courthouse into the December cold and called Maya. "Hey, baby, how was school?" "Fine." "Did they sentence her?" 7 years. Maya was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she'll be different when she gets out?" David thought about it. "I don't know, Maya. Some people change when they face consequences. Some people just get bitter. That's up to her." "I don't hate her, Daddy. I thought I would, but I don't. I just feel sorry for her. She was so angry, not at me, at everything. I just happened to be sitting in the wrong seat at the wrong time." "You were sitting in the right seat, Maya. Don't ever forget that. You were exactly where you were supposed to be." 3 years passed. They passed the way years do after a storm, slowly at first, then gathering speed as the wreckage cleared and new things grew in its place. Sandra Kessler served 3 years and 8 months of her 7-year sentence before being granted parole for good behavior. She walked out of the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, on a gray Tuesday morning with a plastic bag containing her personal effects and $200 in gate money. She was 41 years old. Her hair had gone partially gray. The woman who had once commanded the first-class cabin of a Boeing 777 stood on the sidewalk outside a federal prison and had nowhere to go. The internet, as it always does, remembered everything. Her face was the thumbnail of a video with over 150 million views. Potential employers Googled her name and found the snap heard round the world before they found her resume. Airlines wouldn't touch her. Hotels turned her away. Even retail chains ran background checks and declined. She moved to Newark. She found the only job that would have her, the graveyard shift at a Greyhound bus station cafeteria, serving coffee and reheating sandwiches for passengers on overnight routes. One rainy Tuesday at 3 a.m, Sandra stood behind the counter wearing a hairnet and a grease-stained apron. A bus from Washington had just arrived, and a stream of tired travelers shuffled through the door. Among them was a young black woman in her early 20s, well-dressed, confident, carrying a leather bag in one hand and a violin case in the other. She walked up to the counter with the easy grace of someone who knew exactly where she was going. "Can I get a large coffee, please? Black, no sugar." Sandra poured the coffee. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked at the woman, at the violin case, at the quiet confidence in her posture, and something turned over inside her chest. Not guilt exactly, something closer to recognition. The recognition that this woman, this stranger with a violin case, was everything Sandra had once tried to destroy. And here she was, standing tall, going somewhere, while Sandra served coffee in a hairnet at 3 a.m. "That'll be $2, Sandra whispered, keeping her head down. The woman paid, picked up her coffee, and walked away without a second glance. She didn't recognize Sandra. Why would she? She wasn't Maya. she was just a woman buying coffee. But to Sandra, she was a mirror, and what Sandra saw reflected in it was the full cost of her cruelty. She had been grounded in every sense of the word. 60 miles north, a different world was coming to life. The settlement money had come through 8 months after the trial. $65 million, the largest individual payout in aviation discrimination history. Darren Knox took his contingency fee. Taxes took their share. A trust was set up for Maya's education and future care. And with what remained, David Hawkins bought an old airfield in upstate New York, a scrubby patch of land with a cracked runway, a rusting hangar, and a windsock that had seen better decades. He didn't buy a yacht. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't retire to a beach. He bought the airfield and he rebuilt it, board by board, rivet by rivet, with his own hands and the hands of volunteers who believed in what he was building. The sign above the gate, painted by a local artist who donated her time, read, Hawkins Aviation Academy, Diversity in Flight. The school provided full scholarships for kids from underprivileged backgrounds who dreamed of flying but couldn't afford flight training. Kids from Harlem and the Bronx and Newark and Camden and every other place where the sky was something you looked up at but never imagined yourself reaching. David taught ground school himself 3 nights a week after spending the days managing instructors, maintaining aircraft, and raising money. Karen helped with the books. Ray Maddox, retired now, came up every weekend to teach instrument rating courses. Even Gerald Whitfield, the retired federal judge from Seat 2B, wrote a check and joined the board of directors. You know, Whitfield told David at the Academy's first graduation ceremony, watching 6 young pilots receive their private pilot certificates, when I pressed record on that phone, I thought I was just documenting an injustice. I had no idea I was lighting a fuse. Neither did I, David said. I just wanted to protect my daughter. You did a lot more than that, Captain. Maya was 14 now. She had grown 4 inches. Her left arm carried a long scar from elbow to shoulder, pale and jagged against her brown skin, a permanent map of the worst day of her life. She couldn't extend the arm fully. Physical therapy had restored most of the range of motion, but the last 15 degrees were gone forever. The fine motor dexterity in her left hand, the kind needed to finger a violin string with precision, had not returned. Dr. Patel had been right. Maya would never play professionally. She didn't talk about the violin anymore. She had put it in its case the week she got home from the hospital, slid it under her bed, and never opened it again. David had found her once, 6 months after the incident, sitting on her bedroom floor at midnight, holding the case in her lap, crying silently. He had sat down beside her on the floor and held her until she stopped. "I miss it, Daddy," she had whispered. "I miss the way it sounded. I miss the way it felt." "I know, baby. It's not fair." "No, it's not. She took it from me. She didn't just break my arm. She took my music." David had no words for that. There was no speech, no lesson, no father's wisdom that could fill the hole left by a stolen gift. He just held her. Sometimes that's all a father can do. But Maya was a Hawkins, and Hawkins didn't stay on the ground. She started coming to the airfield after school. At first, she just sat in the hangar and watched the students pre-flight their planes. Then she started asking questions. Then she started studying the manuals. David noticed, but said nothing. He let her come to it on her own. On a Saturday morning in early spring, Maya walked into the hangar where David was changing the oil on a Cessna 172. She was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt and her denim backpack, the same one with the fighter jet patch. "Daddy, I want to learn to fly." David looked at her. He looked at her left arm, the scar visible below the rolled-up sleeve. He looked at the hand that couldn't fully open, the fingers that would never again dance across violin strings. "Your arm," he said carefully. "The controls require, I know what they require. I've read the manual. The yoke needs 2 hands for crosswind landings and emergency procedures. But the Piper Cub has a stick, not a yoke. And you can fly a Cub with 1 hand if you know what you're doing. You've said that yourself 100 times. David put down the oil filter. "Maya, flying isn't like the violin. If you make a mistake, you don't just hit a wrong note. I know what happens, Daddy. I've lived in your world my whole life. I know the risks. I also know that you modified the Cub for left-hand limitations 6 months ago. You moved the throttle to the right side. You adapted the trim wheel. You changed the seat configuration. You did all that before I asked, because you knew I was going to ask. David couldn't help it. He smiled. She was 12 when Sandra Kessler broke her arm. She was 14 now, and she was sharper, fiercer, and more determined than anyone he had ever trained, including himself. You've been reading the regs? FAR Part 61. I can get a student pilot certificate at 14 with your endorsement as a certified flight instructor. I'll need a special issuance medical because of the arm, but Dr. Patel already wrote a letter documenting my functional capacity. I brought it. She pulled an envelope from her backpack. David took the envelope. He opened it. He read the letter. He folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. He looked at his daughter for a long time. "Okay," he said, "we start tomorrow. 5 a.m., no excuses, no shortcuts. You do this right, or you don't do it at all." Maya grinned. It was the first real, full, unguarded grin David had seen from her since before Flight 214. They started the next morning. David was relentless. He taught Maya the way the Air Force had taught him. Fundamentals first, repeated until they were instinct. Weight and balance, weather theory, aerodynamics, engine systems, emergency procedures. She absorbed it like she had been born for it, which David thought she probably had. 6 weeks later, on a brilliant Saturday morning with calm winds and unlimited visibility, Maya sat in the front seat of the bright yellow Piper Cub at the end of runway 27 at Hawkins Aviation Academy. David stood by the wing, one hand on the strut, performing the final walk-around check. Maya ran through her checklist, her voice steady over the headset. Oil pressure green, oil temperature green, magnetos checked, both drops within limits. Carburetor heat checked, flight controls free and correct. Trim set for takeoff, flaps up. "How do you feel?" David asked. Maya looked down the runway. It stretched out before her, a ribbon of asphalt that ended where the sky began. She thought about seat 1A. She thought about Sandra Kessler's hand on her arm. She thought about the snap. She thought about the scream. She thought about the hospital and the screws and the scar and the violin case under her bed that she would never open again. And then she thought about where she was right now, in the pilot's seat, her hand on the throttle, her father beside her, the sky ahead. "I belong up here," Maya said. "Yes, you do," David said. "Clear prop." He stepped back from the wing. Maya pushed the throttle forward with her right hand. The engine roared to life, full and deep and powerful. The little yellow plane began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, the grass blurring on either side of the runway, the airspeed indicator climbing, 30, 40, 50. David watched from the ground, his hands at his sides, his heart hammering against his ribs. The tail lifted, the nose came up, and then the wheels left the earth, and Maya Hawkins was flying. She climbed through 500 feet, then 800, then 1,000. She banked left, smooth and controlled, the wings cutting through the morning air. David watched her from below, shielding his eyes against the sun, and the tears came before he could stop them. Not tears of sadness, not tears of grief. Tears of a father watching his daughter do the thing she was born to do, the thing that no one, not a flight attendant, not a corporation, not a broken arm, could ever take away from her. Maya broke through a thin layer of clouds into blinding sunlight. Below her, the world fell away. The airfield shrank to a postage stamp. The roads became threads. The houses became dots. Everything that had hurt her, everything that had tried to break her, everything that had told her she didn't belong, it was all down there, small, distant, beneath her. She keyed the radio. Hawkins traffic, Cub 907 Fox Delta, departing runway 27, climbing through 2,000, staying in the pattern. David's voice came back through her headset, rough with emotion but steady as always. "Copy 907 Fox Delta. Nice and smooth, Maya. you've got the sky." She did. She had the sky, and nobody was ever going to take it from her. Back on the ground, David wiped his face with the back of his hand and walked toward the hangar. A new class of students was arriving in 20 minutes. 12 kids from the Bronx who had never seen a cockpit. He had work to do. The Hawk watched his daughter soar, then turned back to train the next generation. Because that's what captains do. They don't just fly. They make sure everyone else can fly too. Sandra Kessler tried to break a child because she couldn't stand the sight of a black girl in a seat of power. Marcus Meridian tried to fly broken planes because he couldn't stand the thought of losing a single dollar. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the rules were for other people. They were wrong. David Hawkins proved that a father's love is stronger than corporate greed, stronger than prejudice, stronger than any force that tries to keep good people on the ground. Maya lost her music, but she found her wings. And in the end, the girl they said didn't belong in first class didn't just belong there. She belonged above it all.